You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. Let's begin our program today with a recent U.S. decision to withdraw from another international organization. On Tuesday, the U.S. announced it's pulling out of the United Nations Human Rights Council, citing chronic bias against Israel. The decision is the latest in a series of U.S. withdrawals, first from Trans-Pacific Partnership, then the Paris Climate Accord, and then the UNESCO, and then the Iran nuclear deal since President Donald Trump took office. Many countries called the move regrettable. The UNHCR met in Geneva a day after the U.S. announcement, saying it will take action to fill the post. Before we get down to business to talk about the latest development, let's take a look at this.
The UN Human Rights Council is in session, with the United States seat left empty. The Council President said once it's been formally notified, they'll fill the vacated post. He did emphasize the importance of the organization.
In times when the value and strength of the multilateralism and human rights are being challenged on a daily basis, it is essential that we uphold a strong and vibrant Council, recognizing it as a central part of the United Nations for the 21st century.
The U.S. announced its decision on Tuesday. It's the latest withdrawal by the Trump administration from an international institution. The U.S. envoy to the UN slammed the UNHRC.
Human rights abusers continue to serve on and be elected to the Council. The Council ceases to be worthy of its name. Such a Council, in fact, damages the cause of human rights. And then, of course, there is the matter of the chronic bias against Israel.
Haley criticized the body as recently as March for its treatment of Israel. The withdrawal came also just one day after the UN's criticism of the Trump administration's zero-tolerance immigration policy, which has resulted in the separation of nearly 2,000 children from their parents at the border. Since Mr. Trump took office last year, he's abandoned or threatened to quit several international accords. Last June, the U.S. President said he would pull out of the Paris Climate Accord, arguing it threatens America's economy and sovereignty. In October, the U.S. dropped its UNESCO membership, becoming a mere observer state. In December, Washington notified the UN it will no longer join the Global Compact on Migration. And last month, the President abandoned the Iran nuclear deal, putting the U.S. at odds with nearly every other global power. It is hard to say, though, whether this latest withdrawal will be the last one for the U.S.
So what could be the repercussions of the U.S. decision to abandon the UN Human Rights Council? For some direct answers, let's go to our panelists. He Wenping in Beijing. She's a professor at the West Asian and African Studies Institute of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Welcome. In Washington, D.C., Alan Orr, the founder of the Orr Immigration Law Firm. Welcome. He's also the second vice president of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Also in Washington, we have Steve Pruitt, who's a managing partner at Watts Partner. He's also former staff director of the Committee on the Budget of the United States House of Representatives. Welcome as well. Let me start with you, Mr. Pruitt. You've been through many administrations. If people look at your track record, the question is not whether U.S. has a chronic bias against what is going on with UNHCR, but rather whether the United States is having a chronic bias under the current administration against any international mechanism.
Well, I think it's clear that President Trump campaigned on an agenda that suggests he could improve the standing of the United States, and that in doing so would make life better for all Americans. Now, certainly I'm not here to defend the Trump administration, but let me make it clear. Because that is such a vague promise, almost any action should be expected and could be expected from this administration. I think that the current decision, however, is just a continuation of the standard operating procedure that's been in existence since January 2017, where we're dealing with an administration that is a master of chaos management.
Well,
and when chaos does not exist, they create it. And this is just another example.
but Mr. Pruitt, after that answer, may I also remind you, the U.S. has been talking about its branch of government. Obviously, Capitol Hill is one of those branches. And we didn't see since 2017, as you said, that Capitol Hill has been very much in action against any of the withdrawals that President Trump has been talking about and working on, including this one.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would agree with that. I think, unfortunately, our Congress under its current leadership has not been much of a crusade of courage, to say the least. And I think that in itself suggests that, like is often the case in America, the Congress is going to defer to the executive branch for initial leadership. Although in current developments, which I'm sure we're going to talk about more in this interview, the Congress is now starting to find its feet and is willing, I think, in a number of instances to speak up and start guiding policy and bringing the agenda back to what we have historically seen. So I think there's some light at the end of the tunnel, but I'm still concerned whether it's sunlight or it's the headlight of a train coming at me.
Let's ask Mr. Orr about what kind of light is that. Mr. Orr, you've been working on immigration cases a lot over your years as a lawyer. So let me ask you about what is going on right now with the U.S., particularly regarding the so-called dreamers. You got 2,300 kids being put into cages, separating from their parents because they were under investigation. They are under investigation. And people do not know what's going to be the fate of these kids. And people don't even know where these kids are likely to be in the future. Having said that, though, Mr. Orr, this is the question. You see the House of Representatives and the Senate are trying to come up with their own different bills regarding this. The Senate focus on family separation, while the House of Representatives focus on so-called a comprehensive one, including building the wall between Mexico and the United States, which the president was talking about, and everybody almost laughed about it. But the thing is, what exactly is this role of the Capitol Hill now? Is it as promising as Mr. Pruitt has hoped for, which is the light at the end of the tunnel?
Unfortunately, no. Currently, it's the train that's coming to get us, to run us over in the world arena. So as you sort of spoke about the individuals who are applying for asylum, we should understand that asylum is an international law-based option to come to the United States, and the United States has consistently, under the Trump administration, moved away from international law with regards to the requirements for filing asylum and the standards for filing asylum. And that was done 2 weeks ago by our Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, sort of changing what credible fear means and saying that it has to be from the government and not from private actors, which sort of eliminates people who are running away from gang violence and from domestic violence. But in addition to that, what is sort of going on in our House of Representatives is sort of a trade game playing between the individuals that we currently have at the port of entry and the individuals that we have within the United States, those dreamers who have been here for 10 to 20 years, who have, basically been Americans in all ways except for the documentation, and sort of making exchanges between the two of them and limiting visa categories. So Congress is not standing up and finding solutions at this point because they're not able to make a straight determination either about asylum and just do a direct bill to say let's stop family separation, or about the dreamers. So everything is a trade-off, and in these trade-offs, America always loses because they're eliminating family categories. They plan to eliminate the diversity visa, and those things are just closing the door to the United States to the rest of the world. So we're sort of at the end, we're going in the wrong direction.
Ms. He, your observation here, with what is going on inside the United States, more than sufficient, more than enough political debate. And internationally, you see this administration trying to withdraw from some of the well-established mechanisms, including with the UN and outside the UN. is the current administration trying to free themselves from any rules, will deter anyone who is trying to speak up against these practices? If this continue as the biggest country in the world in terms of power, what would that mean for the rest of the world?
Well, I think this means very dangerous things happening now. Our colleagues mentioned that's a kind of train. I would say this is a very crazy train. Now it's running to even to nowhere. So I even think, even though on the surface, all those things President Trump has been doing, saying this is do the good for the America, make the Americans first, and bring those benefits to the American people, get job for them. Actually, another thing he didn't pay attention, that is American also now it's losing those credit it's been built on from all the past those presidencies. That thing's called soft power. That thing is called reputation. So without those and then all other things, I think it's no base to build on. So these things, I think President Trump, because it's coming from business circle, maybe in his eyes is only looking on those profits, what kind of real money coming to America, but then he hasn't look about this international relation, because international society is not a jungle, so cannot play with this jungle game rule. So you have to respect a lot of other countries, their interests, other interests from other countries, the people there.
Well, this is not an easy question, Mr. Pruitt. I know you are not here to think for the administration either. I hope they could consult you, but I wouldn't think they would. The thing is,
doubt that.
The thing is, what's going to be next if the jungle rule is applied within the United States, which is, you bluster the other side, that you try to use this kind of negotiation still, which you use in real estate businesses, it put it into a much bigger context of national politics, and you also try to use it internationally. What would that mean for a well-established system, even though there are loopholes in the system that need to be fixed? And what would that mean for the other governments? And can they just do whatever they want to do?
Well, first, I think you have to appreciate that this administration's attitude is that they're going to, in every way they can, rewrite the rules. They're not necessarily worried about breaking rules. They're trying to rewrite the rules, rewrite the agenda. And it really is important for not only other international powers and countries to focus on that, but to make sure that as they attempt to make these changes to the rules, that they speak out clearly and loudly. Secondly, let me also suggest that while there are going to be any number of instances in the future where this administration will come up with new twists and new scenarios. I think the best thing you can describe our current situation is we're looking at a buffet menu versus a fixed price menu here of relations and activities that the administration can do. And they're going to sample everything that they can. And I think, again, their agenda is focused on creating the chaos so that they can then, A, rewrite the rules, and B, take advantage. Because, again, while we're focusing on the UN Commission, we're focusing on immigration now, there's a whole agenda that's happening underneath the surface in this country of things that they're changing every day that the media, like you and I, don't get to focus on, and the impact of those things, not only on Americans but on our foreign friends, is much greater than some of these things we're spending a lot of time debating on the air.
Well, we all understand, Mr. Orr, this has a lot to do with the politics and the political season inside the United States. November, that's the timing. That is the midterm election. President Trump wants to fulfill his quote-unquote promises to his voters about all these changes he wanted to finish within his term in order to win votes. But the question is the consequences of this. run much bigger and longer than the midterm election in the United States. If that is being said, can President Trump, according to his own timetable, to do whatever he wants to do? I mean, some could raise this example of what is going on right now with the migrant families as an example that would prove the otherwise, which is, you know, if there are enough opposition voices inside the country, even coming from his own daughter, suggesting to him this is creating a problem, he might change his mind. That's his way of doing business, right? So, Mr. Orr, the question is, can the rest of the country, can the rest of the world be geared up every time when he says something, to the extent that you are facing right now with the migrant issue, and be able to let the opposition voices heard loud and clear, Mr. Orr?
Right. So to answer it clearly is, I believe in our democracy and our form of government, and we have 3 branches of government. And while 2 branches currently aren't operating exactly the way we would like, the judiciary branch has been operating effectively in this migrant immigration arena, with several cases going to the Supreme Court, and most likely this latest asylum case, or the latest sort of executive order, also heading towards the Supreme Court. I think that our president in the immigrant is just basically theater. What he did yesterday did not help anyone. It didn't change any of the rules. It didn't unite families. It basically was just a statement of saying, it's my intent. I would like to have this happen if the judiciary will change a ruling they made 20 years ago to allow kids to be detained for longer than 20 days. That's highly unlikely and really extraordinary of the executive branch to ask the judiciary to change their rules rather than the executive branch changing their own rules with regards to this zero tolerance. And so the zero tolerance is exactly what he's running on for the midterms. And unfortunately in our country, during the last election, a number of people did not show up to the polls. But what I think he's doing now is galvanizing the democracy for all those people who stand for justice and liberty and due process to say, no, that's a bridge too far. We're going to show up and make sure that we return to the United States that we were before.
Ms. He, the United States has been portraying itself and been perceived by quite some in the rest of the world as a country that is valuing some of the important qualities of how countries should be run, of how our common aspirations should be. But now you see that is crippling down over just a number of years. Ms. He, therefore, what will be the responsibilities of the other countries at this point when the U.S. is facing its own challenges internally, be able to figure out the way that we want to develop and the rest of the world can work together, Ms. He? That's a gigantic question, but I think you have your own perspective about this.
Yeah, right. We have seen very clearly in the past 1 year and also that the United States now is losing its, this leadership role because now with all those withdrawal and threatening withdrawal from all those international accords, so now there's no leadership has been there. So I think for the rest of the international society, of course, we cannot just wait for United States to, correct itself, or we just wait for any other leadership coming up. I think international society, we have already reached our consensus before, like those how to deal with climate change, the Paris Agreement, like how to deal with the Iran nuclear issue. Those treaties has been there. So with United States or without United States, I think all those existing treaties, I think will continue. So that will show the international society still there, united together. So we will lead ourselves forward. So without even United States in.
Mr. Pruitt, very briefly from you, you think things are going to change after November?
I believe they will, although unfortunately the change is probably going to be more chaos, not less. If the House changes party control, there will be some checks and some balance into things, but that will only encourage, I believe, the administration to put more fuel in the tank, so to speak, here.
Mr. Orr, I was looking at the approval rating of the earlier 3 presidents, including the current one. Obviously, the current one approval rating has been quite low, yet it is picking up dramatically when it comes to Kim-Trump summit over the past few weeks. And now seems that the president is sailing with the wind that he believes is winning him a lot of credibility for the future. How do you see this president feeling about himself and the policies he's likely to create or challenge?
Right. So this being our first reality television president, his ratings are important to him, but they may not show true because at the, having that sort of monumental meeting doesn't really lead to the internal impact. So it really is early on to tell how these things really will play out in history with regards to what agreements are actually made and what concessions are actually continue to exist. We've seen on both sides that both administrations have made a decision and then sort of backtracked that decision within, sometimes within hours. So it's still early to see those sort of things, but it's hopeful. Even with his approval rating being less than the United States, what I sort of say is who are they asking and who's sort of responding to that? I think a lot of the demographics leave out minorities and the new America, meaning new immigrants, smaller millennials, and so therefore you might see a change based on the election, because from what we're seeing of the pouring out with regards to just the asylum issue, the border issue, is that many Americans are saying, no, this is not us, this is not me. And even those people who are moderates are sort of saying, this is not me, this is not us. So that approval rating, I would like to see it again today. Sort of, I guess after the executive order it probably peaked a little bit, but after people actually see the executive order was nothing, maybe it will also decrease. But it's really based on this sort of reality television where one day it's up and one day it's down, and it's just the cinema.
Only time would tell, I guess, gentlemen and ladies. So thank you so much for being with us, He Wenping, Alan Orr Jr., and Steve Pruitt. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your insights.